Struck by the fact that the stability argument is used often in the Nepal debate. I think the experience of Sri Lanka is that what has been used to justify stability has resulted in a kind of unresponsiveness and strong government that goes against the interests of the people. And so the corruption, the nepotism, the abuse of power that Sri Lanka has experienced in the last 6 to 7 years has really created enormous problems and political cynicism in the minds of the people. And this, coupled with the fact that we've had to deal with the LTTE terrorist movement and this obsession with national security, the president assuming extraordinary powers under state of emergency, has made the situation worse. The third argument that I'd like to borrow from Lin's is that the danger of a presidential system is that it promotes a winner-takes-all or zero-sum game outcome. So, for example, next week's presidential election in Sri Lanka is crucial. Yeah? The future of the Rajapaksa family is at stake. It's a winner-take-all situation. The stakes are so high. In fact, the outcome of the presidential election will impact upon the parliamentary election that's due in March. You see? So, the whole argument that was made last evening by the Minister of Federal Affairs, the need for consensual politics, coalition politics, power-sharing governments, becomes extremely difficult when you have a presidential model, because the president is so powerful, it's very difficult to have a meaningful power-sharing arrangement because the prime minister and the other cabinet ministers will have relatively far less power. And in Sri Lanka, we had a brief experience of cohabitation, president from one party, prime minister from another, from 2001 to 2003. And it proved extremely difficult because the powers were so loaded in favor of the presidency. The other point, the fourth point that Linz highlights, is the danger that a presidential system could devalue democratic institutions. And this is something that is particularly tragic when you look at Sri Lanka. As you know, we have had a very strong tradition of parliamentary democracy, universal franchise since 1931. If you read the Hansards, the debates in parliament in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the quality of parliamentary debate was very high. Parliament functioned as a deliberative assembly. We had a strong committee system. In fact, in the early 1990s, a delegation of the Nepal Parliament came to Sri Lanka to study our Public Accounts Committee because we had a fairly good tradition in the Asian region. All that has gone. That tradition has ended, and we've had, in the last 20 years or so, a shift from Parliament as the main locus of political debate and discussion to the Presidential Secretariat. And the Presidential Secretariat full of unelected presidential advisors, no parliamentary oversight, and it's all part of the presidential patronage politics that I was talking about. And this, in turn, has had a ripple effect on Parliament and other institutions. No capable people want to enter Parliament anymore because Parliament is no longer the main political institution in our constitutional structure. The quality of Parliament has suffered, and so the deliberative scrutiny functions have suffered drastically as a result of this. Not only has Parliament been devalued, but I would argue that the cabinet of ministers and as an institution has been devalued. And Linz makes this point in his article. He says that a presidential cabinet is less likely to include strong-minded people because all the people appointed to the cabinet hold office at the pleasure of the president. Whereas in a parliamentary executive model, you will find that cabinet ministers sometimes are from the prime minister's same party. They are strong members of the party. The prime minister has to appoint them. And there is therefore a greater likelihood that the quality of the cabinet will be stronger. The cabinet ministers could resign from cabinet, go to the back benches, and then make it extremely difficult for the prime minister. A related point, and I think a very important point in the context of South Asian politics, is that it also, a parliamentary system promotes a system where there'll be less arrogance on the part of the wielder of the main office in power. One of our Marxist politicians, in fact, defending the parliamentary executive model, said that a virtue of the parliamentary executive model is that the Prime Minister has to be continuously accountable to Parliament. The Prime Minister knows that he or she can lose his job at any time if he ceases to command the support of the House or the confidence of the House. Yeah, a motion of no confidence. Whereas in a presidency, it's virtually impossible to remove the president. Furthermore, the Prime Minister is a member of Parliament, sits in Parliament with his or her parliamentary colleagues, is not cocooned in a presidential office far away from Parliament. Question time. We've all seen how Gordon Brown gets a hard time in the British House of Commons, but this is also very healthy, and it creates a sense of humility and a healthy sense of irreverence for the wielder of the main political office. So I think that in South Asia, where our political culture is so hierarchical, where we have very little internal party democracy, where we have a strongly entrenched welfare state with patronage politics, etc., the weaknesses and the dangers and the perils of presidentialism that Linz highlighted apply even more forcefully in the context of our part of the world. I'd like to say a brief word about an argument that a proposal that is floating around in Sri Lanka and I believe has been floated in Nepal as well, the idea of an elected, nationally elected, so-called executive prime minister, a prime minister elected by the whole people. It was tried in Israel in 1992, from 1992 to 2001. It applied or worked at 3 elections. There were some very Israeli-specific reasons for that, the dominance of small parties, but after 3 elections, it was abandoned and it was acknowledged as a failure. And I think it's important to study why Israel flirted with the idea, abandoned it, before we think of introducing it either in Sri Lanka or in Nepal. So let me conclude, Mr. Chairman, by just making a few comments. The Sri Lankan experience with presidentialism has been a negative one when viewed from the perspective of constitutionalism, the rule of law, and the protection of liberal democratic values and institutions. Our democratic traditions have been seriously undermined as a result of presidentialism. And in 1971, when the proposal to introduce a presidential system was first floated, one of our most distinguished liberal prime ministers, Dudley Senanayake, had this to say about the presidential system. This is 1971, and I like to think that his words were prophetic. He said, "The presidential system has worked in the United States, where it was the result of a special historic situation. It works in France for similar reasons. But for Ceylon, it would be disastrous. It would create a tradition of Caesarism. It would concentrate power in a leader and undermine parliament and the structure of political parties. In America and France it has worked, but generally it is a system for an Nkrumah or a Nasser, not for a free democracy." Secondly, I have tried to use Linz's Perils of Presidentialism argument or article as the basis for a critique to suggest to you that perhaps the lessons from Sri Lanka may be of more universal application. The particular form of presidentialism in Sri Lanka is problematic, but I think the Linz argument or article highlights the fact that the concept of presidentialism also has serious flaws. And the last point that I'd like to make is that constitutional commentators in Sri Lanka have quite often, unfortunately in my view, cited an English poet when they have talked about this notion of forms of government. Alexander Pope, who said, "For forms of government, let fools contest. Whatever is best administered is best." And I hope I've convinced you that forms of government is very important. It is a very important topic. It can have profound implications for constitutionalism and for constitutional governance as a whole. So in a nutshell, Mr. Chairman, my message is, please don't follow the advice of Alexander Pope. or any pope for that matter. Please don't follow the mistakes of Sri Lanka and beware the perils of presidentialism. Thank you.
But I am afraid that he has put forward very forceful argument against presidentialism in Sri Lanka. That is worth noting. But I am afraid some others would put forward equally forceful argument against the parliament system as practiced in South Asia. There are virtually hereditary prime ministers in South Asia, yeah, whether in India or in Bangladesh or in Pakistan or earlier in Sri Lanka, so somehow in Nepal also. So I think the arguments can be put forward both ways, so anyway it will be useful for us. Thank you for that. Now we'll go for certain comments on these presentations. First of all, I'll request Professor Surya Subedi of University of Leeds to make his comments.
I also would like to take the opportunity to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me to join such a distinguished panel this morning. I was actually on my way from the UK to Cambodia as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights to monitor the situation there. Then when I knew the conference was taking place of this magnitude and seriousness, I thought I should come to Nepal to participate in the deliberations. As an independent and objective observer, observing the situation within the country from a distance, I have formed my own views. So what I would like to do this morning be rather prescriptive and direct in my observations. Well, Nepal has practiced basically a parliamentary system of government since 1990, with some gaps in between. As a person who is an academic in a country where parliamentary democracy has worked rather well and has been perceived as a good model for other countries, you may expect me to make my arguments in favor of parliamentary democracy. If that is the case, you are in for disappointment. I believe in the presidential system of government for a country like this one. That is the way forward, as far as I am concerned. And my reasons are as follows. Why Nepal needs a presidential system of government? Number one, Nepal has gone from a unitary to federal structure. And especially with the rise of ethnicism, even demands for federal structure along ethnic lines. Number two, Nepal has adopted a proportional system of election. As a result of that one, you have in parliament today about 25 political parties. This has become a society politically fragmented and fractious. Number three, it is not a homogeneous society like many other societies. It's so diverse. There are about 101 ethnic groups. Then the process of power sharing, the way it has been practiced here in the recent past, has been the worst form of power sharing. Various constitutional bodies are vacant. Positions have not been filled. Various appointments have been made, but the people have not been able to work effectively because the perception people have that so and so belongs to so and so party. Then the society itself has been highly politicized. I am a member of the English bar. When there is an election, no political word is ever raised. Politics doesn't creep in. But here all professional associations, including governmental and non-governmental, have been highly politicized. These are the 7 different reasons why I thought the country needs a rallying figure. Nepal is the poorest country in Asia and 14th poorest in the world. You all have seen the state of infrastructure in this country. Even our distinguished international delegates is in a poor state of repair. So my view is that parliamentary system of government is not a bad one. It has worked well and can work well here. But we have departed from the basic ingredients for a parliamentary democracy to work here. The cocktail that you have is not a healthy cocktail. Proportional, if you had maintained the first past post system, if you had maintained the unitary system of governance, if you had not developed this unhealthy, worst form of consensual power sharing arrangement, then parliamentary democracy could have worked. But Nepal has already departed from that one. It's very difficult to return to the old form of parliamentary democracy in this country. And as a result of political instability within the country, since 1990, in this country, there has been change of government in more or less every year. Even foreigners don't know who to deal with. Today you come to Kathmandu, there is one person in power. 1 year later you come back, there is another one in power. So Nepal has not been able to achieve meaningful economic cooperation even with its neighbors. In this age of globalization, where Nepal's #1 priority should be economic development to deliver to the people, that has not been achieved, so that will be more difficult to achieve. So my rather direct message is that let there be a visionary Nepali lead the nation for at least 5 years under a presidential system of government. You have political manifesto, but you are not able to implement the commitments you have made through the political manifesto because you are not going to remain in power for more than 1 year. So the frequent change of government has been damaging, and constant squabbling for power